Hello, this is Professor Marsh, and this is the lecture on filing status. We're going to review the lesson plan 04 on filing status. So if you'd like to go to TCE, Vita TCE Central, and take a look at that lesson plan, go right ahead. Then we're also going to look at the filing status workout, and that's also available at that site for the Vita program. So let's go to the first page of the presentation on filing status and the lesson plan for that. So the first thing that you have to do when you're preparing a tax return is to find out the number of exemptions and dependents, and then also the filing status for the taxpayer that you're working for. And in the Vita program, what we do is we try to identify in the intake process the most likely and most advantageous filing status for the particular taxpayer who's come for us to serve. So beginning this lesson, we have a few key terms. There are five types of filing statuses. One is the single filing status. Then there's married filing jointly, which is the most common filing status for married people. Married filing separately, which is a special type of filing status for people who are married but wish to keep their tax filing separate for some reason, and those are very rare occasions. Then there's also the head of household status. So someone who was single, unmarried, or deemed to be unmarried might be able to file as head of household and actually get more favorable rates than a single person does. And by the way, married filing jointly also provides a more favorable rates and probably a lower tax than filing singly. So anyhow, those are four of the five, and then the last one is a qualifying widower. So you've got single, you've got married jointly, you've got married separately, you've got head of household, and you've got a qualifying widower. And this unit will help you to define and to understand which people meet those requirements. And then in addition to that, another key term is the term dependent, and that's an individual who may be claimed as a dependent on another person's tax return. So that's somebody who meets all the applicable dependency tests. So let's go on to this lesson, and we're told that we want to review the online demo of TaxSlayer on entering the taxpayer's basic information. So please do go ahead and take a look at that. And if you like, maybe pause this video and take a minute and go to the practice lab and go through the TaxSlayer IRS training. So for the filing status and for dependency, if you wish to, although we'll have a separate lecture on that in one or two additional lessons. Then we're going to provide details and engage the students. And so you students, I hope you're engaged. I hope we're giving you some good details. But you'll see that there's a link to the filing status workout at the Vita TCE Central, the Lincoln Learn Taxes workout. So we're going to get to that in just a minute. Then we're going to look at some visual aids. And one of the important visual aids to look at first is to look at the front page of the Form 1040 and just look at the block where you check a box for the filing status of the taxpayer. And then also take a look at Form 13614C, which is our intake form from the interview and intake lecture, which I think was our second one, lesson number 2, and take a look at that at page 1, part 2, on marital status and household information. And then you also might want to take a look at publication 4012 regarding starter return, filing status, and dependents. So let's go on to the 5 filing statuses, and you can see that the lesson gives you an explanation of all of those. So you can have a single taxpayer, and you can take a look at publication 4012, and there's actually a decision tree with respect to the interview tips for how to ask a taxpayer what their filing status is. Most taxpayers are not going to understand the different types of filing statuses in the detail that you know them. And so this is a question that gives you several steps, basically 6 steps, to do the filing status portion of the interview. So first question is, were you married on December 31st of the tax year? So for us, it would be December 31st of 2022. If you're going to be working in the spring of 2023, filing tax returns for the prior year. If you are, then do you and your spouse wish to file a joint return? If yes, filing status is married filing jointly, and you've made your decision. Step number 3 is do all of the following apply? You file a separate return from your spouse. So this is if the answer to question number 2 is no. So you file a separate return from your spouse. You paid more than half the cost of keeping up your home for the required period of time. Your spouse didn't live in your home during the last 6 months of the year. So that means, from July 1st to December 31st, that spouse wasn't there in the house, and that your home was the main home of your child, stepchild, foster child for more than half the year, include any individual who would qualify as your dependent, except he or she does not meet the gross income test, does not meet the joint return test, or could be claimed as the dependent of another taxpayer. And you claim an exemption for the child. So if the answer is yes, then your filing status is head of household. Step number 4, did your spouse die in 2019 or 2020? If that is a yes, then you go to step 5. If it's a no, you go to step 6. So step number 5 is do all of the following apply? You were entitled to file a joint return for your spouse for the year the spouse died. You didn't remarry before the end of the year. Of course, if you did, you might file jointly with somebody else, not with this particular spouse. So that's kind of a silly point. But anyhow, you have a stepchild or child who lived with you all year, except for temporary absences, who would qualify as your dependent, except they don't meet the gross income test, don't meet the joint return test, or maybe you may be claimed as a dependent by another taxpayer. So don't include a grandchild or a foster child. And then you paid more than half the cost of keeping up the home for the required period of time. And there's a footnote to help you understand what that is. And there's actually a separate worksheet for that in the materials as far as the cost of maintaining a house. So if it's yes, stop your filing status as qualifying widower with dependent child. If it's not, you go to step 6. And if the answer to the questions are both yes, then you go to head of household. You paid more than half the cost of keeping up your home for the required period of time, and you have a qualifying person who's not necessarily a child or stepchild or foster child, but a qualifying person who permits you to file as head of household, and there's a footnote for that too. So if you don't meet both of those, but if the answer to both of those questions, if the answer to either of those questions is a no, then your filing status is single. So that's the training in a nutshell, and you'll see many examples of it that kind of flesh this out as we go along. But that's what you'll find in publication 4012. Okay, so let's now go. Let's see, back to where am I? Okay, how do I get back to where I was? I was in. Oh, I know, I was in the PDF, so I have to go back to the filing status lesson plan PDF. Okay, so there we are, and you can see in the form 13614C, where you have part 2. It's toward the bottom of the first page, in which you have a little place where you can enter the various boxes and what your filing status is going to be. And there'll be some more lessons on this, but that's the long and the short of it, and that's I think a very helpful presentation. So we get back to my lesson plan and go on to the next point. So we've covered the 5 basic statuses, and that takes us down to really the end of the lesson. You'll see various references that you can refer back to with respect to filing status. This is toward the bottom of page 5. As we said, the Form 1040, also the Vita Program's Intake Form 13614C, and you'll see Publication 4012, which has the filing status decision tree, and also the list of questions regarding who is the qualifying person, qualifying you to file as head of household, and the worksheet for cost of keeping up a home. So those are all found in Publication 4012. Publication 17 has a chapter on filing status, which you might take a look at also. Publication 501 has a chapter on filing status. Publication 555 deals with community property, which we probably will not have to deal with if we're practicing in South Carolina. There's not a lot of community property in South Carolina among Vita taxpayers, but if you were in the south, west, and far west of the country, there are a number of states that have a community property regimen that affects filing status, particularly for people who are filing, who are married and are filing tax returns. So if you're looking at the map of the United States and you're looking at sort of the starting at Louisiana, Texas, New Mexico, Nevada, California, skip Oregon, and Washington, those are the community property states plus Nevada and Wisconsin. So those are the community property states. And then there's a number of states that have elective community property, but we're going to skip that for now. The lesson plan also gives you a link to Innocent Spouse Relief, Publication 971. That's important for altering the joint and several liability that married filing jointly spouses have for mistakes on prior returns or perhaps misstatements on prior returns. And then there's also a Form 8379, which is the injured spouse allocation. So those links are all there. I don't know that you need to look at any of the optional ones at this time. You've got plenty of good information in the first 4 of them, 1040, 13614C, Publication 4012, and Publication 17. So you have enough information in those first 4 to give you what you need to know as far as determining filing status. Then there's a suggestion, again, to go to the Practice Lab tutorial. What I'd like to do at this point is instead to go to the Link and Learn Taxes and go to the filing status workout, which I'm going to right now. So if this is our 4th workout that we're taking a look at, our 4th lesson in this course, and it begins with Publication 4491 regarding filing status. And if you click on that link, it takes you to a much more detailed review of filing status in a 10-page really discussion of the various filing statuses in much more detail with some exercises that it gives you the answers to. So I would strongly recommend that you do the exercises in this to reinforce the learning and to give you the example of just making a few decisions to begin with. So you can see some examples on page 4-6 and then some exercises. And so let's just do the first exercise. So Alexandra's younger brother Sebastian is 17 years old. Sebastian lived with his grandparents for the first 2 months of the year. From March through July, he lived with Alexandra. I guess Alexandra is our taxpayer. On August 1st, Sebastian moved in with some friends, stayed there for the rest of the year. Since Sebastian did not have a job, Alexandra gave him money every month. Assuming Alexandra had no other dependents, can she file as head of household? And the answer is going to be no, that even though Alexandra has her own residence, and even though she supported her younger brother, he didn't stay with her for the required amount of time. And you'll find the answer to that down toward the end of the materials. So if you look at the exercise answer, you'll see that I was correct, actually, that no, Alexandra can't claim Sebastian as a dependent, and she can't claim head of household status because Sebastian lived with her for only 5 months, which is less than half the year. And for a dependent who's not your child, or someone who qualifies as the equivalent of your child, and Sebastian was a brother, in that case, the required amount of time to live in the household is 6 months. And there's exceptions for children, especially children who are away at college. So just keep that in mind. So there are other exercises that you'll find on page 4-9, and the answers to those are also on page 4-10. So maybe, test yourself, pretend it's Jeopardy, go ahead and, try to get the answers yourself, but then you can go back and you can check your answers to see if you got it correct. And that's certainly a worthwhile exercise to try. So that's the first page of the filing status workout. Going on to the next page, you can see the intake, interview, and quality review sheet, and this is just the bottom portion, part 2 of page 1 on the 13614-C. And you can see, and when you're looking at it in the practice lab, those buttons will be blue as far as the first question. What was your marital status as of December 31st, 2021? So you would click on the buttons to select filing status, and then answering the questions, yes or no. Those would also be ones that you click on, and then you can fill. There'd be blue boxes where you can fill in the appropriate information. And just understand that for the dependents that you're listing, that you have to have their birth date, you have to have their relationship to you, you have to know the number of months that lived in your house, whether they're a U.S. citizen, a resident of the U.S., Canada, or Mexico, whether they're single or married, whether they're a full-time student, and whether they're permanently or totally disabled. And those are all important information to obtain in the interview. Then, again, there's a link to the filing status job aids from publication 4012 that we reviewed looking at the lesson plan. Then there's a number of workouts. And so, excuse me, sorry. A little cough here. There's a number of warm-ups with workout resources. These are just additional case studies and questions that the service asks you to answer, and it gives you additional experience in getting the correct answer. So for this first question, for purposes of determining filing status, which of the following taxpayers would be considered unmarried for the tax year? And you have Chris, who did not get married until December of the tax year. Well, that's a wrong answer, because Chris, if she gets, or he, Chris could be either male or female, got married in December, then they were married on December 31st. Presumably, they didn't get divorced as quickly as some of Britney Spears' marriages. But in any event, then Chris would be married on December 31st, and that's the date we determine whether you're married. It's the last day of the tax year. But then we have Tori, whose spouse died in February of the tax year. And then you have Hal, who was married until his divorce in November of the tax year. Well, Hal was not married on December 31st, so Hal is going to be unmarried for the tax year. Tori, whose spouse died in February, Tori would be considered married, because there is an exception to that December 31st rule for someone who is widowed and does not remarry. So Tori would still be permitted to file as married for the year, and would be able to file a return with Tori's deceased spouse for the year, as long as Tori did not remarry somebody else prior to December 31st. And so if you click on Hal, that's correct. Hal, who got divorced in November, filing status is based in part on the taxpayer's marital status the last day of the tax year. However, if that person's spouse died during the year and they didn't remarry, then they're still considered to be married. So anyhow, then you'll see many additional workouts, and maybe just check if you get it wrong. Check the correct answer, maybe check some of the other wrong answers, and they give you an explanation for each of these cases. So do look page by page through this, answer all the questions, and see if your original answer was correct, or if not, try to understand the reason for the correct answer. And you can always go back to those materials that we just reviewed, the 4012, the publication 17, and the two forms, the 1040 and the intake form, the 13614C. So that's it. Then you get a skills warm-up on page 17, determining the filing status, and basically takes you through an interview with hypothetical taxpayer Becky, and then you've got Latricia, who comes in, and you have some questions for Latricia, and that gets you to the filing status for each of those taxpayers. And then you've got another case study that is here on what I believe might be the last page. And nope, not yet. It was page 24. And now page 25, qualifying surviving spouse, and situations that are out of scope for Vita and TCE. So if you've got people who come in with any of those three statuses, I'm now on page 28, those are really out of the scope for this particular part of the program, and probably something that you need to talk about with your site supervisor. Okay. Then you've got another certification warm-up with additional questions, and this takes you all the way through to a certification warm-up drill and practice. On page 35, you can go ahead and enter your answers, and then check your answers and see if you got the same things. And then there is a tutorial in TaxSlayer, so you can go to the practice lab and do the tutorial, and I do urge you to do that as well. So that's it for the filing status lesson, and good luck with your study. And there is, again, there's no particular homework for this other than to watch this video and then go on to the next lesson. Our next two that I will post either later today or early tomorrow morning Today is Friday the 6th, so I'll be posting them on Saturday. We'll be on dependents and then also exemptions. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.